It's really good. All we hear is Radio Gaga. You know what to do.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so the Q&A session is about to begin. We do have a couple of wireless microphones, just like this one I'm using just now. We're going to try and get round as many people as possible and as many subjects, as many areas of this huge discussion as we can. So if I can ask everybody who's wanting to ask a question, if you can keep it kind of short and sweet and kind of help us get to the point as quickly as possible, that would be fantastic. There we go.
Brilliant, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Q&A begins.
Good start.
There we go. I think you were there first with your yes, ladies
Well,
signal.
we've got a few here. Got the mic now. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. I'm basically a convinced yes voter, and to me it's not about economic issues, it's about self-determination. But I recognise a lot of people out there are wobbly because of, facts of life, earning your trust and all that. So I just want to venture that there's a couple of things I think that aren't being said clearly enough to help persuade people who are afraid of the economic facts. I'm going to say two slightly contradictory things and ask you to respond. One is the legalities of this. As Alan, I think, has said, we are in a union which isn't really a partnership. And people use words like divorce as an analogy, and divorce is an emotionally upsetting thing. But people do separate. But it's a dissolution of the Treaty of Union, meaning that both signatories would be successor states. So I think there's a whole lot of rubbish talked out there about Scotland kind of ending up going off on its own and leaving this much larger entity as the UK to continue as the stronger entity, when in fact both of us are equally entitled to claim successor status to all the treaties entered into by the United Kingdom, if you follow me. So that does affect our relationship with the European Union and all other sorts of things. But my second point is kind of slightly the opposite. I know a lot of people who are afraid of that sort of divorce, that emotional thing. And I wonder whether we need to just imagine that the post-independence reality might actually be a reformed United Kingdom, something we might call a British Union, within which Scotland would have the same sort of relationship to the other nations within Britain that the UK presently has to the other nations within Europe. In other words, it would be independent within a larger supranational entity, and it would have foreign affairs and its own defence sovereignty. And I wonder if that would help assuage the anxieties of people who, for this just feels like walking out on a plank. I wonder how people feel about that.
Okay.
So I just want to shoot a fox about Scotland being a kind of secessionist region. And secondly, think it's not going to be the end of Western civilization. We can be integrated socially and economically with the rest of Britain in a new configuration.
The divorce analogy obviously is one that they use. Why would you break up a happy family? Because they know that plays emotionally. But, not all families are happy. And divorce is upsetting, but then after it, you're single. And I think, what it's felt like being Scottish is it's like the relationship between, a sort of domineering husband and who's saying to his wife, "You're fat, you're ugly, nobody would fancy you, how would you make your own money, you know what I mean, you're nothing without me." And, then our pals take her out for a really good night out and she gets chatted up by a stunner. We need to give Scotland a really good night out. But joking aside, what you're saying is true. I think even if Scotland's independence, there are cultural bonds, there are economic bonds, there are trade bonds that, of course, we're going to share. They do like to present it as though it's going to be like Game of Thrones and there's going to be a giant wall of ice erected between Scotland and England, which is just nonsense. There's going to be the same freedom of movement between Scotland and England as there is now. And actually, my feeling is that Scots and the English will get on far better as a result of untying this knot, because, as I said earlier, then we will actually be equals. And all those historical resentments, there'll be no reason for them. So I think the island itself will still be called Britain. You know, even somebody like myself who's very passionately in favour of independence, I can't deny there's an aspect of my identity which is British. You know, in the 90s we listened to Britpop and, you know, I love British film, I love Shakespeare. You know, there's all sorts of things that Scotland didn't produce and England did that I feel like has formed part of my character. And that's not going to change. If what you're talking about is a kind of more federal political union, I think I'd probably need to hear a bit more detail about what that would involve, because the Lib Dems have been exceedingly vague about that for obvious reasons. But I'll pass on.
Do you want to go next, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quota put up from the UK-Ireland agreement kind of sets the scene for what that would look like. And I mean, the UK-Ireland is one, if you look at the Scandinavian countries. At various times, Denmark was ruled the whole thing, then Sweden and Norway together, then Norway separated, and Finland was part of something else, and whatever, Iceland, whatever. So, but they've for a long time, even before the EU, had all kinds of common stuff, travel areas, and they've got even all kinds of economic cooperation and organisational cooperation across things, so it makes sense to do it on a bigger entity. And if you talk to a Norwegian or whatever, then they'll say, yeah, they're Scandinavian, right? And you see if you go abroad somewhere and there's a sporting event or whatever, I remember in the Olympics, I think it was the Danes and the Swedes were sharing the same hotel and all working together and stuff. So they do a lot of that stuff together because it makes sense and they don't have a problem with that.
I'll only add one tiny wee thing before we move on to the next question. A lot of it's been covered, but my perspective is that this kind of successionist route, or going down what people might call Devo Plus, Devo Max, whatever, my discomfort with it is that there's nothing on the table, nothing concrete, nothing costed. It's just words, and it's largely meaningless, and frankly I don't believe it. And the other point is I'm quite uncomfortable with the idea that it still retains your gifting control somewhere else, rather than saying, no, this is actually our inalienable right to run our own country, and still kind of tug on our forelock and say, I wonder, would you mind awfully if we got some of the tax take from just a few more taxes? I'm personally quite uncomfortable with that. Anyway, moving on to the... So
just use another point, which was about the successor state. Right now, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm not going to give you a rock-solid answer on that. But, I mean, technically there is a case there, right, that you could possibly argue, right, and different lawyers will obviously give you a different answer on that. For whatever reason, politically, and I'm assuming they've thought it all the way through, but I'm not party to that, is obviously the Scottish Government seems to have taken the position that we're not going to contest that one. Now, whether that is because if they kind of put that out of the way, it makes it easier to get concessions and other things, with the threat that it's still there, I don't know. Right? I don't know what the thinking behind that is, but there's some deep thinking going into that as to why they don't want to put that on the table. And as I say, it'll be down to the politics of the negotiations, I would imagine. There's no exact parallel, but if you look at the breakup of the Soviet Union, effectively what happened there was that there was 15 countries. They all split up at various stages over a short period of time. But when they came out of all of that, Russia effectively was a successor state. Absolutely correct, that's right. And they got, as a consequence of that, the outcome was that Russia got the nuclear weapons, they got the seat in the UN Security Council, but they also got to keep the debt. Not all of it. Ukraine did take some for various political reasons. So there was a negotiation there, and it could well be that that's something that raises its head later in the negotiations.
Okay, next question. Oh, sorry, we've got one from the live stream.
Okay, we've got one from Ewan, who's from far off Shawlands. And Ivan, what would the cost of Scotland be of not having a currency union?
Right, okay. The currency. Last time we spent half an hour on the currency question. Can we not do that this time? On the currency union, the first thing to say is that obviously Scotland can use the pound because you can't stop them using the pound, right? It's like saying you can't use the English language when you're a separate country. It's just nonsense, right? You continue to use the pound because it's a freely tradable international currency and anybody in the world can use the pound. So that isn't the issue. That will carry on without any doubt at all. The issue obviously is round about the structure you've got in terms of the relationship with the rest of the UK and the Bank of England. Now I'm going to lunch next week. Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, he's coming up to Scotland. He's going to meet the First Minister, and they're going to talk about currency, right? Ed Ball's making noises last week about they need to sit down with the FM and talk about currency. So there's a recognition on the side of the UK government that it's an inevitability, but all the political noises are around about creating confusion, doubt and uncertainty in the minds of people. And there's two economic reasons why it's an inevitability. One is that, and I'm talking about the structure of doing it formally rather than Scotland just using it. One is that the UK balance of payments minus £36 billion, which is the amount more that they import more than they export, which has got a bearing on your currency. If you take oil and whiskey out of that, then it doubles. Because oil and whiskey are such a large amount of the UK's exports. So that's a huge problem for them in terms of currency management. The second one is the amount of trade that goes on obviously across the border. So why would you put transaction costs in place? There's about 700,000 English jobs depend on trade with Scotland. Scotland's the rest of the UK's second biggest trading partner after the US. So you wouldn't do that either. And the third thing very quickly is round about the debt announcement the other week, where the UK, as a matter of fact, you can't get away from it, they're responsible for the debt, again, as the continuing successor state. And that is really a precursor for lots of reasons I can talk to you about later. And I've written an article on that on the website, the Business for Scotland website. But effectively, that is starting down the road towards the formal currency agreement. It's very difficult for them not to have the currency agreement because the markets will drive them to make that clear and transparent before we even get to the referendum date. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Following on from that, has anybody else in the audience here got more questions about currency? Because obviously it's still quite a hot topic for discussion.
That's a Bitcoin question again.
Today, I read in the news that the British government are considering getting crowd-control water jet cannons. The reason they want to do this is because they're anticipating a lot more protests due to the austerity measures that are happening. Surely that should be indicative that we don't want to keep the pound. If this is the levels of debt we're in, where people are protesting and they're trying to shoot us down with.
Yeah, but hold on, I mean, you got to separate out what's what. I mean, the pound as a currency is something they use to buy stuff, right? And as I said, it's a freely tradable currency, so anybody can use it. That's a completely different thing from how many pounds you've got, which is what austerity is all about.
Okay, well, to further that, then, like, even if we are using the pound, I would still suggest to everyone that after we win the yes vote, that we should think about pushing towards getting our own currency, because the value of the pound is going down because the debt levels are going up. And it's the same all around the world.
Any more questions about currency from anybody? I think there's a chap over the back. Did they stand up?
Yeah, it's a similar question. We'll understand why keeping the pound is the best thing for now, but what do you think, especially in terms of business, for 10, 20 years' time? Pros and cons.
Pros and cons. I mean, yeah. I think for the foreseeable future, then obviously it's going to be the pound because it makes the most sense. What's going to happen 20 years down the road, who knows? Part of the problem with having a separate Scottish currency would be, as I said before, the strength of it. It'd be like the Norwegian krona or the Swedish krona. It would be stronger than sterling because of the numbers I've shown you on the strength of Scotland's economy, the fact that we've got lower debt to GDP and deficit to GDP ratios, the fact that it's backed by assets like North Sea oil, etc. So the Scottish pound would be stronger, and the problem with that, of course, is it's a problem for manufacturing because it's harder to sell stuff if it's overvalued in world markets because your currency is stronger. So what happens in 20 years, I don't know, but that would be the negative side of it. And in reality, when you talk about having your own currency gives you freedom, as you saw with the way the UK government responded to the money markets on the debt issue and having to make those announcements last week, it's the debt, the money markets that will drive, and the international trade markets that will drive a lot of this stuff. And if you look at interest rates, for example, there's very little difference in interest rates between the US, the Eurozone and the UK because they all kind of have to mirror each other to some extent within a kind of reasonable boundary, because if one of them's way out of line, then the money markets will react accordingly and cause all kinds of issues. So in reality, having your own currency, where it sounds great, you've still got to play within the international framework, that kind of restricts. You don't have, unless you're North Korea, you don't have 100% freedom to do what you want anyway. So it's all very much a give and take situation.
Okay, I think there was were you wanting to ask a question or earlier?
There was a couple.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Lady there.
Hi, my name's Joan from Glasgow. Like yourself, Alan, I was never interested particularly in politics until now, because it was always a case of everybody talking over everybody else, and you got tired of just the blame factor going backwards and forwards between parties. I've got a 14-year-old daughter, so she's too young to vote in this referendum. But my question is around the youth. How do you reach the youth, the 16-year-olds, who really, I'm quite sure, if they were to be here tonight and could listen to what you were saying, could be equally fired up to consider positively the referendum vote. Now, my husband and I have attended 2 evenings now. The first one was last week at the Mitchell Theatre with Alex Salmond, which was terrific, but it was £20 a ticket. And tonight the venue is for over 18s, and the ticket price was much more favourable. My question is, how are you going to reach the 16-year-olds? Myself, I was raised in a family that weren't political, so there will be a vast number of kids in the same situation. Now, I presume there's difficulties getting into the schools to actually give maybe both sides of the argument, but is there a way, or have you considered how you would reach these S5 and S6 pupils, either by allowing them to attend in a venue that could accommodate under 18s, where there wouldn't be a charge, and that buses could be arranged? You know, I would be prepared to pay for the cost of buses to get them there, to allow them to actually hear both sides of the argument. Or, in my case, I'm definitely going to be voting yes, but what's the chat about that?
Alan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's frustrating actually. I completely know what you're saying, because my feeling is that they would be persuaded, or certainly a lot of them, not all of them, but would be persuaded through exposure to the arguments, but they're not exposed to the arguments, partly because their culture, their pop culture, the arguments aren't carried there. And when I've done these things in schools and they've said, look, you know, we don't have the information, and I'm like, but how do we get it to you? And they didn't know, because we're not on E4. We can't stand outside their schools busking. Sure, yeah. I mean, there's loads of stuff out there on YouTube. Absolutely loads. I mean, online, the Yes campaign and all of the various different groups in favour of independence couldn't be doing more than they are. We're winning the internet war. You know, we're much more present in Twitter, we're much more present in Facebook, we're much more present in YouTube. We are better together, confining their campaign pretty much to the mainstream media for obvious reasons. And so that is frustrating, because unless those things go viral and happen to reach them, then there's not a lot more they can do. I think the schools have a responsibility to chair a debate, and I think any school worth its salt, I think parents should be insisting that there's a debate at their local school and putting pressure on the headmaster or the rector to make sure that's happening.
Well, what I've discovered is that what I'm getting back from my daughter at school is, depending on the teacher and what their opinion is, they are very open to, you know, telling the children what their ideas are. And although they do encourage a two-way debate, there isn't the opportunity there, I don't think, for people like yourselves to be on the
Sure.
in the assembly halls, and okay, for fairness, get the better togethers in as well and give them
Well, of course, that's only appropriate.
It's not going to be the case in school. You're going to have to get them to organised events.
Well, I know that National Collective, which is a group of artists and creatives in favour of independence, are deliberately doing social nights where there's bands, there's comedians. It's a bit more pop culture-y, and trying to get young people there. But, you know, you've got to get them there. If they decide not to go, I mean, I know when I was 16, there's absolutely no way you would have got me along to a political event. Maybe for something like this, maybe. It's perhaps different. But, you know, there are layers of sort of apathy there that you've got to try and get through, and they are interested. So I think put pressure on schools to make sure there's a debate, because I think once there is a debate and they are exposed to the arguments, they do come round. And I did one in an Edinburgh school that was a real eye-opener for me, because their default setting is no. But I don't think that is because of any loyalty or love for the union. I think it's because they don't know enough about the argument. So they just resort to the status quo. And we had a panel, and they had a panel, and we all put forward our case. And what happened was that what I realised that they're no interested in, they couldn't care less about the blame game that you're talking about, because the SNP guy and the Labour guy just got into this Punch and Judy show. It's your fault, no, it's your fault. We brought in this law. No, you didn't. We brought in that law, and you could see them like losing the will to live.
Somebody like you that's young.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
What are you doing after the show?
Right. Possibly time to move on.
Well,
Can we move this?
Alvin.
Can we move this on? There was a couple of
yeah.
hands raised at this side. If we could
They
skip
want to be
on.
inspired, essentially.
Yeah.
Sure.
They want to be
There's a
inspired.
couple more over here.
Sorry. Just to touch on that last thing, I work as a secondary school teacher, and the local authority that I'm working in didn't allow us to have a debate where we wanted
Really?
those. Now I'm 100% yes, and I'm interested in doing it. There is a bit of self-interest there, because I think I agree with you. If they found out the facts, then I think you could convince voters. But we intended to do it as fairly as you could possibly do it. And like get both sides in and get speakers on both sides. And the local authority were not happy with that idea.
Could they actually stop a school from doing it?
Well, they certainly stopped the head teacher. Like, it was a deputy head teacher that raised the idea. The head teacher vetoed it on the advice of the local authority. But anyway, I was going to ask
who
you,
runs the local authority, if I can
I
ask?
don't know if I should really say when it's going to be broadcast.
Just say who runs it. You don't have to say which authority it is.
I don't have to say which authority it is.
No, who runs the local authority?
Who is the head of education there?
Which
Yeah.
party runs
Oh,
the
right.
council that you're...
I don't know. I'm not even sure.
There's
It's
a
in
late-
Ayrshire. It's one of the Ayrshire councils.
Because surely they've got a duty
Yeah.
to do the opposite.
Yeah.
To actually... And it has to be balanced,
Yeah.
of course. We're not saying we should have exclusive access.
Yeah.
But
But that
that's
was just
disgraceful.
kind of interesting. What my question was going to be is, I've been like hearing kind of talk of like aspiration all the time. We need to, and it's kind of quite a clever ploy, because it blames the people who aren't in work or aren't achieving, in inverted commas. It's their fault that they're not prospering. Now, a lot of young people, one of the things that said at a recent inspection that I had was that we want to see how you're helping young people aspire. My point would be, well, there's a lot of kids in here that there's nothing much to aspire to in this area. There's the kids that go to university, and they've got that to aspire to. What about the other kids? In the area that I work in, I can't see a lot of skilled jobs that other young people can aspire to. What do you think, independent Scotland, as business people, what more do you think could be done to create those kind of jobs for young people?
Yes, massive question. Do you want to go first, Lauren?
I think that's another one in relation to the one at the front.
Could I just say something? I'm happy to say that I represent a school in North Lanarkshire, and we've been absolutely happy to have a debate on independence. What's been really difficult for us is to get people from equal sides of the debate. It's been really easy to get people in from the Yes campaign. It's been really quite difficult to get people in from the No campaign. And clearly we can't have a debate. We would like to have a debate for our children in my school in North Lanarkshire. With no prejudice or preference, we would like to have a debate. You simply cannot have a one-sided debate, which was just to answer the question, and it's been really difficult. We would love to do that. We just can't get people in.
I'll
from
come and
either
speak
side.
for the No campaign. I know the lines back to front.
Ivan, I knew you would. It was getting someone from the other side. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, let's take some feedback.
Yes, they are. I think you're right there. I mean, first of all, they've got fewer people on the ground because the grassroots campaign for Yes is larger. They have obviously the political parties behind them, and they have the media, and they're quite happy to keep the campaign there because that's an area that they know they can control, and that's where they're sure-footed. So first of all, it's numbers for them. They've just got fewer people that can go in and do these things, but they don't see that as a problem, because when it comes to the young people, they'll let the Union Jack do all the work. Hey, you all saw the Olympics, kids. Woo! Man runs very fast, completely the same thing as the future of the Scottish economy. And also, the Union Jack's kind of a fashion thing now, and they're quite happy to let that sit there, step back for the debate in the schools. I mean, they'll do some of them as a kind of fig leaf, but they're not concerned about the fact that the debates aren't happening in schools. That suits them fine. So it is a tactic. Sorry.
Yeah, and I suppose my observation from a business perspective is it's not just even in schools, that some of the debates we've organised, we've actually been unable to get people from the No campaign to take part. And when I say people, I mean seriously credible business people. They've been unable to put people up. And part of the issues they have is that when you start to strip out some of the facts on the table as compared to people's opinions, because we've all got our own opinions, they just don't stack up. And no serious business person, it's very difficult to find one that will stand by the facts, or the opinions rather, of the No campaign, because they are barely credible most of the time. So they do struggle to find people. Ivan, do you want to pick up on the young people, any more about the young people?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a question about job creation, isn't it? And at the end of the day, I mean, there's no magic wand you're going to press a button and it's all fixed, right? I mean, it's all about getting the economy moving, which takes time. Now, it's got to be said, if you look at the latest unemployment numbers out today, there's another significant drop in Scottish unemployment, which for quite a while now has been a fair bit below the UK unemployment level. I think we're at 6.4% now, and the UK number's down about 7.1%. So the things that are happening, what it shows is that the Scottish Government, even with the limited powers they've got, are able to do some stuff that's helping in that direction. If you go through the white paper, and I would recommend the easiest way to go through the white paper is download it and then search for it. Just key in employment and see what it shows you. I'll just take you through all the different sections that refer to that, or whatever else you want to search for. There's a lot of stuff in there about the kind of things that can be done. A lot of it centred around helping manufacturing companies and helping export. A lot of it around tax stuff that encourages small businesses to get going, innovation and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff you need to do to get the economy moving. There's policies there for that. The fact you've got a stronger economy with more money in it, instead of sending it down south, is going to help as well. And also the focus. I mean, I've met John Swinney and talked about this stuff. He was visiting a factory with him, and it was round about looking at the education system to understand that you're giving people the skills that they're going to need at a higher education level to be able to support the economy. Because the reality is, I mean, we've got members that work in renewables, engineering, consultancy type of jobs, and they're in the North Sea stuff as well. They're crying out for engineers. I mean, the projected shortfall of trained engineers is vast. So it's able to line that up and plug into the right kind of jobs with the right kind of training. So there's a number of bits there, but the question is, are we in a better place to fix that ourselves, or to let somebody whose main concern is how much tax they get out of the City of London run it, because that's really the focus they've got, and it's quite a different focus for how you configure the economy.
Can we take a question from online?
Okay, I've got Malcolm Lindsay from Glasgow. What would be the cost of collecting our own taxes? The Scottish Government had a chance to raise tax by 3%, but did not, because it was going to cost them as much as they gained.
Yeah, okay. The tax collection process, they're going through the process at the moment to setting up Revenue Scotland in order to have that facility. I don't think it's true to say that, 3 pence an income tax raise is a lot of money, so I don't think it'd be fair to say that it would cost you that much to set up the bureaucracy for it. Top of my head, I don't know the answer to the number, but it's not going to be a significant number in the scheme of the billions and billions we were talking about earlier. The reason that they decided not to vary the tax rate is because there was no party stood on a platform of either raising it or lowering the rate and won the election. And if that's what somebody wants to get elected to do, then that's what they could do. But the reality is, as I said earlier, there's an awful lot more to the tax position than income tax, and you need control of the whole range of levers to really drive the economy in the right direction. and the powers that the Scottish Government have got are very, very limited in terms of all you can do is tweak the basic rate of income tax, which doesn't really help in the bigger picture. The things they're talking about, raising the minimum wage and cutting corporation tax, are both things that are going to focus on companies that are wanting to invest in higher skilled, higher paid jobs, obviously. So that's a big part of the focus. But you need the full range of levers to make impact, and just playing about with the income tax, a penny or two isn't really the issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One more question over there.
Hi there. I live in the Shetland Islands but work in the United States. I left in 2010 because I tried to set up several different companies here in Scotland and found both the regulations and the taxation to be very, very difficult to deal with. I live in a community that has several Scots who are also in a similar position whereby they would love to come back to Scotland to start businesses, to be entrepreneurs in the place that they grew up in, the place that they love, but are finding it very, very difficult in terms of the tax structures to be able to do so. Can you speak a little bit about what an independent Scotland might do for people in that sort of situation?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would recommend you go through the white paper, because I mean, I don't know everything that's in it, but from what I'm aware of, clearly there is a focus, as I said before, on small business and entrepreneurship. And Scotland's got a long history of that. Entrepreneurship, going way back to Adam Smith, but it's not something that has been given its place recently. And again, I mean, a lot of that has been because the focus from the UK government has been focused on the City of London. In terms of the tax, there's a whole undertaking in the white paper about simplification of the tax code. I mean, after the US, the UK has got the second longest tax code in the world. I don't know how many thousand pages, which is clearly a lot of nonsense, and it needs to be basically start with a blank bit of paper and say, right, what can we do here that makes a lot more sense for what we're trying to achieve. So that is one undertaking that's definitely in there. And there's a lot of other stuff around it. As I said, it's supporting export, supporting small companies, supporting patent, supporting innovation, etc. In terms of expat Scots, I think that's one of the things round about what we call the independence bounce. I mean, we did some stuff last week with business people round about what opportunities would there be after independence. And there's a whole load of things, including the economy would be stronger, we'd have more money, and the economy would have more focused on developing growth, etc., with governments that were that way inclined. But one of the big issues is round about the when you talk about immigration and people coming into Scotland, there's 800,000 Scots living in the rest of the UK, not counting the ones that are living in the US and wherever else that you mention. And the reason they're not here and they're there is because there isn't the opportunity here. And those are exactly the people you'd want, because it's young folk like yourself. I've got skills, I've got get up and go, I've got talents that want to do stuff. And that is a big part of what you would want to attract back to Scotland. And I think we talk about the independence bounce. It's Scotland's profile in the world. It's doing things like reducing the airport tax to get more direct flights in and out of Scottish airports. It's reducing the corporation tax, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it more than pays for itself because it encourages companies to set up, etc., etc. There's a whole lot of things that can be done and that are identified to help in that regard.
I'd just add to that. I think it's obvious that the Scottish Government does value our types of businesses, our SMEs. So, for example, the support, they give support to small businesses in terms of rates they have to pay, and that's been very successful. And I'd said earlier when I was talking that there's much more open-mindedness to about a range of different types of businesses that actually want to encourage. We've got kind of used to it in the UK that there's only one type of business, and that's a large globalised sort of multinational that's headquartered in London, and of course that's not the case at all. The Scottish Government wants to encourage more cooperatives, more social enterprises. They're very active in supporting that, and all of these types of moves are very, very healthy. And of course, as Ivan says, the tax system, which is a complete nightmare, and I concur with you about it's almost as soon as you're able to start to grow, this kind of big hammer comes down and makes it really difficult for you. It's complex, lots of regulations, and it just acts as a barrier. I think it's clear from my understanding of the White Paper, Scotland's Future, that it's a positive move to encourage jobs, because of course to encourage business, because it's all about job creation. We have to get people into work, because there's all the kind of social and cultural elements of what that brings, and of course realistically that brings a tax take into the coffers for the Scottish Government as well.
I think it's also worth saying that companies should be paying taxes and should be paying what they owe, obviously commensurate with the size of the company and the profit that they're making. As far as I know, the SNP intend to lower corporation tax, but that's also for small businesses, which is obviously less objectionable than Amazon and Vodafone and companies like that getting away with murder. I would like to see a Scotland in which business is regulated. You don't want to stifle businesses, but they should work for society rather than drawing from society. And I think in an independent Scotland we should start looking at nationalisation again. I think if something is considered vital to the survival of people, like energy, like water, like transport, like housing, like land, that should be part of a nationalised economy. And I think luxury goods, the consumer economy, there's a case for that remaining in private hands, but I think privatisation in the UK has been a disaster.
Next. Oh, great.
David McGowran, somewhere on the internet. Given that land is a tradable commodity with fluctuating yet rising value, what solutions are available to a new Scotland in terms of land reform and community buyouts?
There's a book coming out. Well, there's a book that's been published by Andy Whiteman called Who Owns Scotland? The Poor Had No Lawyers, brackets Who Owns Scotland and How They Got It, because a lot of this was done through theft, exploitation, that the land ended up in the hands of very private, wealthy interests. And there's a book forthcoming by the Radical Independence Campaign, which I think is going to be a really valuable contribution to the whole debate. And I'd encourage everybody to read it, because it diverges quite sharply from the SNP's vision for Scotland. And it talks about community buyouts, nationalising the land, and passing laws through Holyrood that would enable that. So I think that's very optimistic, actually. I think that's great, because you go to some of the Highlands and some of the islands, and it's like fucking Jurassic Park. They're game preserves, and they're there simply for wealthy people to come in and shoot deer and go away again. And vast acres of Scotland are set up for this, and huge tracts of land are owned by people who have no productive use for it. And so I would like to see things moving in that direction.
Yeah, there's clearly issues in Scotland with the way land ownership has developed over the centuries. There's clearly issues. I think the important point for me is that it's up to Scotland to decide in the event of a yes vote, and ultimately, setting aside all the business case for this, that and the next thing, it's about a democratic element. And should Scotland vote yes, which I believe it will do, then whatever party is putting forward proposals for reform, I think there's a very healthy debate to be had about that, because it's not just about kind of estate preserves, it's also about kind of repopulation. We've got quite heavily centred around the Central Belt, and you think logically, well, what would the reason for that be? I think there's lots of thinking to be done there and a lot of valuable contribution. But the key thing is that we will get what we vote for, and we really stand no chance of doing that in the current political system. I'm looking at Ivan to see if he wants to add anything. Right, okay, so moving on, another question then.
How's your stamina? Are you still up for it?
Lady at the front down here in the white jumper.
Hi. We talked earlier about fairness and living in a country where that is important. Do you think it's fair in an independent Scotland to charge students from England university fees while allowing EU students not to be charged?
Well, this is part of the knot of the United Kingdom that needs untied. There's a contradiction there, really, because the Scottish Government can protect fees for Scottish students within the UK because it has the power to do that, because education has devolved. It means that they can't do the same for English students because they're out with Scotland. So that's actually the union's fault rather than the Scottish Government's fault. If Westminster wanted to redress that, they could pass a law making education free, but they don't want to do that. So obviously the Scottish Government has the power to protect Scottish students. It's not discriminating against English students. It's Westminster that's discriminating against English students.
So this will happen then post-independence?
Well, I mean, obviously Scotland still wouldn't have the ability to make tuition free for English students because they wouldn't be from Scotland. That would be for the English or people in the rest of the UK, the electorate, to elect a party into Westminster that makes education free. It's not your fault, basically.
Ivan?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of one of these back to front, upside down arguments. It doesn't make any sense because the reason that is the situation that's caused by the union just now. So if you think that's not fair, then it's not fair just now. It's not going to change. There's clearly a bunch of technical issues. If you come at it from the other direction, would Scotland be able to do that? There's a bunch of technical issues around about EU law, and it gets into a bit of a grey area. Certainly, if you look at what they do in Wales, they give grants. It's not as much, it's about 3,000, I think, but they give grants back to students from Wales who are studying in Wales, whereas if you're from outside Wales, you don't get that grant. So everybody pays, but if you're Welsh, you get it back. There was interesting stuff. There's a Danish guy that's in Scotland, and he writes a blog, and he gave a big explanation about what happened when Denmark and Sweden had a similar situation, where a lot of Swedes were going to Denmark to study because it was cheaper, and they did something similar with grants and also other things that could be done so that they were able to have that same situation. Whereby it was effectively a lot freer, a lot cheaper for Danes than it was for Swedes. So technically, there's ways around it that you can do it. Exactly what that model is going to look like, I don't know. That's one side. Can you do it? The other thing, should you do it? Well, as I said, that's at the end of the day. If you had a lot of money to spend, what would you choose to spend it on? And you could decide that your most important product in the world was English students, or you might decide to use it to relieve world poverty or to do something else with it. So that's a political decision that you would make. Whenever.
Okay, another question. How are we doing for time? I think, are we finishing at 10, so we've got 10 minutes, is that right?
That's
right.
Up to you guys. You've got homes and families and lives.
Right,
and you want to get back to watch, Newsnight.
Yeah.
Many more questions, are there?
I've got one from the internet again. It's John McIntosh from Pollock Shields. Does the panel agree with yesterday's report that the economy is the single biggest factor influencing people's decision?
Great question.
It's a very good question.
Well, if that's been shown to be the single biggest factor influencing people's decisions, then obviously yes. For me, it's not the biggest single factor, but it's obviously a huge factor. And I think when you speak to a lot of undecideds and no voters, that's what they'll cite. So, yes, I would agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My take on it is that, first of all, the question is a £500 question that John Curtis asks every year. And I was listening to him this afternoon talking at great length about it. They also ask the question, if you'd be £500 better off if independent, how would you vote? And about 60% vote yes. And if you say, would you be £500 worse off if after independence, and only about 15% vote yes. So it's hugely dramatic, right? And you think, well, £500 only, some people it's a lot of money, but it's not. It's not £1 million, right? So the question then is that for real? And my take on it is that, and I think a lot of people agree, that it's really people reflecting their concerns about the Scottish economy more than anything else. from a position where they've believed all the you're too poor, England subsidising, all this kind of nonsense, and that's ingrained, and they've got an instinctive feeling that says that Scotland wouldn't be able to afford to be independent. So a big part of what we're trying to do, all the presentation and the YouTube and all the articles, is to demonstrate that Scotland is richer than the rest of the UK and could easily afford to be in a better financial position than it is just now. But if you look at it from the other side and you say, right, what the opinion poll says, if you ask people, do you feel Scottish or British, about the vast majority, 65, 70%, about 75% actually say they feel Scottish, and only about 10 or 15% say they feel British, and the rest are other nationalities if you force them to choose one or the other. If you say to people, do you trust the Scottish Parliament and think it should have more powers compared to Westminster, a huge majority again say would prefer the Scottish Parliament to Westminster. We think it should have more powers. If we had to choose between one and the other, would do that. If you ask them, do you think the Scottish Parliament should have power over taxation, welfare, etc., 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 again, big majority say yes, it should. So you look at all of that stuff and you say, right, the reason people aren't there for voting yes is because they've got this nagging doubt about the economy. And I think if you take that barrier out of the way, the floodgates open, and a big majority of people would be voting yes. I think that's really the battleground. And there's a 30-35% that will vote yes, whatever. But to get it over the 50% line, you need to convince those undecideds, and their issue is the economy. It might not be for a lot of the yes people, but for the undecideds, I think the economy is a big issue.
I think there's a big issue around confidence. Going back to what Ivan was saying about too wee, too poor, too stupid, I find it remarkable when we were talking about the schools earlier that I hear 17-year-olds, my daughter's 17, her last year at school, saying, but we can't afford it, can we? So where are they picking up this information from? Is been so deeply ingrained in our culture, and therefore, as Ivan says, the relationship between the economy and the confidence, that the surety that yes, of course we can afford it, of course, in actual fact we can more afford it, in actual fact we would be much wealthier than the UK is at the moment. To make that kind of seismic shift when your grandparents and your parents have been taught and brought up to believe that is really significant. So to me, underpinning the economic question, it's a massive confidence issue, and it's that very same confidence that affects our young people and their interest and capacity in this debate, because a lot of them feel, I know from talking to my daughter's friends, well, what's the point, because nothing's going to change anyway, and they're so disengaged. So it's almost like a kind of cycle, and trying to break that cycle, and we know that breaking the cycle, you need to do radical things to do that, and this is an opportunity to do something radical, to my mind. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Just a point about that. I think some of the confusion rests over this 9.9% of revenue versus 9.3% of spending as well. This has been bandied about on social media all over the place, but it's actually quite misleading. It's two different percentages of two different things, if you like. However, it's quite usually used in a misleading way. Could you address that? I think that's part of the confusion here.
No problem at all. I mean, it's a shame. When I did the first presentation, obviously I had all of that, and I went through that in quite a bit of detail. If you want to see it, it's on YouTube. As I said, you can go and sit and look at it. But very briefly, as I said, both Scotland and the rest of the UK, or the UK as a whole, are running a deficit. It means that they are spending more than they're earning, right? So if you take it in isolation, you would say, yes, Scotland spends more than it earns, and yes, it's two different numbers, right? But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's still in a better position, right? So you follow it through. Scotland's deficit is about 7 billion, which is about 5% of GDP. The UK's deficit is 120 billion, which is about 8% of GDP. So we've got a small overdraft, they've got a big overdraft, okay? So when you talk about the percentages, you're saying, right, there's a 9.9 as a percentage of the tax take, so we generate more of the total tax take that's going down there. The money that's coming back to us, even though it's a bigger number because we're in deficit, the money doesn't come from England. The money comes from the international money markets. They go borrow they borrow 120 billion and send us 7 billion and then charge us 4 billion interest on it, right? So that's kind of how it works. So yeah, they're two percentages, two different numbers, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's still in a healthier state than the rest of the UK. And if you think about it the other way around, and you do the maths, and you say, right, so we're 9.9, 9.3, that means the rest of the UK is 90.1 and 90.7. So they've actually got the percentages the other way around. So that kind of makes it a bit clearer as to what it's all about. But I say, if you go watch the YouTube video, you'll see it all lays out exactly what the numbers are and where it's all coming from.
And again, I think, to me, it's the No campaign. I mean, Joanne Lamont was at it the other day in the Scottish Parliament. They really want to obfuscate it and try and make it complicated rather than just distilling it down into simple facts. And you often hear the analogy around Norway, well, I wouldn't want to be paying that for the price of a pint of beer, or I wouldn't want to be paying those taxes. Yes, it's entirely relative how much you have to pay for a pint. It hurts a lot if you hardly get paid anything. You have to look at the whole kind of big picture.
The wages are much higher.
Yes, exactly. The debt and the deficit, they're two sides of the same coin. You need to be able to look at the whole picture. The bottom line is that Scotland it's a wealthy country, and were it to be independent, it would be wealthier in the UK. That's quite a simple statement of fact based on the numbers that we've got out of Gers for the past 30 years.
Well, it's easy to turn that one on its head. Just ask them, well, in Turkey, you'll get a pint for a pound.
Here's a microphone coming.
Sorry. It's quite easy to turn that one on its head. I just say, in Turkey, you'll get a pint for a pound, but are you happy to take Turkish wages?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Thank you.
The tax that's levied on large companies is levied on the place where their head offices are. All the supermarkets in Scotland pay tax, and most of them in London. So that applies to the likes of Marks and Spencer's, British Home Stores, all the big chain stores. It applies to all the insurance companies for insurance tax. Is that a significant amount of money, and is it reflected in any way in the figures that you were quoted earlier?
Excellent question. In fact, we've got the exact same question from somebody sat in that exact same part of the hall at the last meeting. So the answer is, if you go, the corporation tax from memory is about 5% of the total tax take in Scotland. The numbers that are in Gers and the reports for that they come from the Office of National Statistics, and they do a whole bunch of calculation behind that to figure out where they think the money's coming from. Have they got that exactly right? I would reckon that what you're saying is probably true to some extent. Are we able to quantify that? No. Is it a significant number in the scheme of things? Well, it's a useful number, but it's going to be hundreds of millions rather than billions. So I would reckon that if you had an independent Scotland and you divvied it up, because what would happen in independent Scotland, if you're a UK company, you would most likely have to set up another company in Scotland. You would trade through for your Scottish business. That's the way it would work. So at that point, you'd be taxing that business in Scotland. So there probably would be an upside there, but we're not able to quantify that exactly.
But in here just for a second, anybody who's wondering what YouTube videos we're talking about, if you go to YouTube/Independence Live, you'll find our page and you'll find all the background information.
Is that where this video will be?
I'm sure that's where this video will be as well. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's getting a sore head with all the figures. So you can take your time and watch those when you can. Independence Live, YouTube/Independence Live.
I think we might be losing people to their
bladders. There is. We are kind of running short of time, so maybe we could take a few questions, kind of quick fire.
On the cultural question matter, Alan, I watched you a wee while ago debating with Eddie Maguire, and I was disappointed in him, a good musician. But they kept almost threatening that this huge number of no artists were going to come forward, and they were almost saving them up for a big blow. Do they exist there? Once you're coming forward?
Maybe. If there are artists in favour of a Novo, I wouldn't quite understand why they haven't come out before now. Maybe it's a tactical thing, and Better Together are holding off and releasing their big guns. Who knows? And I'm sure there are artists out there who do support a no vote. It's unfortunate, though, that the lack of them has meant that Better Together have said, they're afraid to come out. They're afraid to come out because they're afraid of the repercussions. Like, as if they're not going to get a grant because they happen to vote in favour of the status quo. It's ludicrous. Or they'd be intimidated or whatever, you know. It's like, well, what you're saying is you're afraid of debate. You're afraid of people disagreeing with you. And most of the artists I know with integrity aren't afraid of putting their opinions out there. Nobody has to. If somebody says, well, I've got my private opinions and I'm not going to broadcast them, that's entirely up to them. I don't personally understand it myself. Some people think, oh, maybe I'll lose some of my audience. You know, I'm well aware there's people out there who might have considered buying my books now who probably never will. You know, I've probably lost a fortune. But, you know, I think the debate is bigger than the personal career of Alan Bissett. So maybe there are. I don't think there are, but who knows?
I'm not convinced there are. I think we hear this time and time again. So we know in Business for Scotland, Business for Britain was going to be launched, and we've never heard anything since. I'm not convinced. I think that if there were people, they would have probably come out by now. I certainly don't believe there's such significant numbers that they're being stored up. I just don't believe it. And actually, what I find, because Ivan and I in particular, and a lot of people in Business for Scotland are out all the time, when you're talking and engaging with people at venues such as this, we've got a strong groundswell of support. The people who have not had the chance to engage in the debate and think and reflect on what it means in their personal lives sometimes have a default position of no. As soon as you do that, they move to yes. So Alan's point earlier about the kind of groundswell continues to be significant. I just don't believe it. My husband's a singer. And I don't see that from his community. Generally speaking, they very much welcome the already strong differentiation and focus on the arts. Fiona Hislop did a very good speech about a year ago, really quite clearly different to what was happening in the rest of the UK. And what I find, and this is just anecdotal with his sort of friends, is they tend to be very much in favour.
And even when they do come out, they have a tendency to arse it up. Charlene Spiteri of Texas said, well, of course I don't think Scotland should be independent. I mean, we don't even have basic resources like oil or gas that would help our economy. And you're like, really? Right.
Okay. Questions? There's a chap there at the back.
I've been given permission to say this by everyone. In terms of artists coming out and saying no, what about people like the members of the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra who face immediate job loss in the case of a yes vote?
How do you know that's true?
They're all saying it, they're just not allowed to say it.
But how do you know that's true? Seriously?
Because the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra's funding comes from Radio 3 and not from BBC Scotland.
Well, we'll rewind. Right, okay, just talk about the BBC money. Well, first of all, that's an issue in terms of what's the word? Intimidation is probably the word, but I'd like to know more about that. But in terms of funding, first of all, BBC licence fee money, which is the biggest part of their income, is about 3.6 billion collected from the UK, goes to London and then distributed wherever. The Scottish part of that's about 300 million from Scottish licence fee payers. The amount of money that's spent on BBC Scotland is 120 million. Okay, so the amount of money that's collected from Scottish licence fee that goes centrally, only a small part of that comes back to BBC Scotland. So the reality is that post-independence, if you get the licence fee the same and you put the money into Scottish Broadcasting Corporation, Scottish Broadcasting Corporation would have nearly 2.5 times to 3 times as much money to spend in BBC Scotland as it does at the moment. So in terms of the funding issues, that's not an issue. There's going to be money. Now, some of that you'll need to use to buy episodes of Doctor Who, which is fair enough, right? But you'll still have a fair pot left even after you've done that. And the reality is most programmes, etc., are made by private companies that then sell them to the BBC, etc. Anyway, that's the way it works. So in terms of fund, I don't know specifics for an orchestra. I don't even know if that's in the white paper. You might want to search through and see if it is. That's the funding, the fact that it comes from London. It's back to this carry on. It's like we give London a tenner and they give us a fiver back. And if we're independent, we want to get our fiver back. I mean, what's wrong with that picture? Okay, so that's part of that whole thing. But I think more interesting is what you're saying is that the members of the orchestra have been told that they will be unemployed if we vote yes, and they're not allowed to tell anybody that. Well, what exactly?
They've all been told that I'm just not really sure how much I should probably.
Okay.
say.
You've said it now.
It's out there.
Don't worry, nobody will know. It's not on the internet or anything.
Oh, I know.
No, seriously, I mean, if you want to talk about it later, we're quite happy to talk about it later. Okay,
That's a good point. I know people who work in the BBC who are a bit worried because they think they'll lose their jobs, because one of the things the SNP has said in the white paper is that there'll be a Scottish broadcasting service, which might mean that the Pacific Key headquarters there, a lot of the people who are staffed there won't be working there anymore. That's understandable that they'd be worried about that. Now, what I've said is, first of all, if you're setting up a Scottish broadcasting service, where are you going to go to for the staff? Well, various people who might have been made redundant at the BBC have got a CV which has BBC on it, which is one of the most, respected broadcasters in the world. They're going to be in a pretty good position to apply for a job at the Scottish Broadcasting Service. Secondly, the BBC itself will still have to retain a base in Scotland for reporting on events. So it's not as if the entire BBC is going to be wiped off the Scottish map. It's the same as anybody losing their job in any circumstance. You take your CV, you apply for another job, and if you've got the relevant experience and skills, you've got a good chance of getting it. So, I understand the concerns. I'm not mocking that at all. I just think that if I was hiring a symphony orchestra for the Scottish Broadcasting Service, I'd know where to look.
Yeah, I think to be fair, it's. I think it's much clearer than that. Even I think in reality, what will happen is that the whole thing will just move over and they'll change the sign over the door. I think I couldn't imagine that they wouldn't do that, because that's the only logical thing to do. They're just going to change the sign and everybody comes back to work on Monday and carries on. And I think that's true across all the government departments that are in Scotland. They'll go through the 18-month process of figuring out stuff that's done in Scotland for the rest of the UK and vice versa. You either swap one for the other, or you continue to provide the service in the other part of the country, or you move some work to compensate it all. And the only people that are going to be unemployed after a yes vote are the 59 Scottish MPs that go to Westminster.
Just to follow on from that, again, I would use a kind of logic stance to that. That doesn't sound like a logical position to me. So the BBC SSO, if you remember, was under threat a number of times. It's always had to fight for its existence. I can't remember the last time that happened, but certainly 10 years ago or so. And I mean, you need a symphony orchestra aligned to your national broadcaster. So I think Ivan's logic position about it changing over would make sense to me. And also in terms of other kind of symphony orchestras, I mean, obviously the RSNO is a totally different set of circumstances. It's not aligned to your broadcaster. The Scottish Chamber Orchestra, the SEO, again, fills a different thing. It just doesn't logically compute. I suggest actually it's more likely about one of those kind of fear stories that somebody said, and I must admit I'm personally going to go and follow this up now, because something doesn't add up to me. So thanks for that. Question in the middle.
We should probably think about winding up.
There is a very short amount of time, so maybe just time for another one or two questions.
Who's still got a question? Put your hand up if you've still got a question.
This is for a no voter, no person.
What's happening?
Oh.
Right, I've got someone who's voting.
All right, on you go. On you go.
Right, okay. And they're saying, I can't find serious business people who are going to vote yes. Could you fill them in?
Oh, that's, delighted.
Right, we're talking about over £1 million turnover, people that are voting yes.
That's an easy question to answer.
What's what are they saying that they...
Over 1 million turnover are going to vote yes.
Well, you're looking at one.
Yeah, Malcolm's looking at one.
I'd also add, so if he wants to look up on the website of www.Business for Scotland and look at some of the people in there on the board, I can't disclose figures, but many of the people on the board have really, really very significant 10 times that turnover. I won't say who, but
and the rest.
So Business for Scotland has some very wealthy businessmen. Most of it are the people that I described from the SME community. Our membership is roughly about 1,200. So compare that to the, if you believed that CBI members were against, which is also under doubt as far as I'm concerned, the 50 to 60 headquartered, that is just certainly not true. We've got groups in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee, Perth, Aberdeen, Inverness. So I would also invite him to look for his local no campaigning business groups So
I mean, at the end of the day, you've got Jim McCall, you've got Brian Souter. If you want to talk big names, and if you want to talk names that aren't quite as big as that, then it's on the Business for Scotland board. There's Tony Banks and Murray Macklin, and there's a whole range of people that have got businesses that are well in excess of that kind of size. I mean, serious money. So.
Okay.
This might be the last question.
Can I just ask what the panel's view would be if the SNP wasn't the ruling party when we did get independence? Because the talk tonight seems to be the white paper and SNP. But what would be your views of a Scotland that wasn't ruled by SNP with independence?
Well, I mean, just on a technical, sorry, on go. Yeah. I mean, just on a technical point, the way the white paper's written, and they had to write it like this because to do anything different would have led to people complaining about lack of information. The way they've written it is really in two parts. So each section's got a part which is, this is what we could do if we were independent, and then at the back of that they say, if there's an SNP government, this is what we will do when we're independent and there's an SNP government. So that is kind of the way they've done it, because they're the government and they had to put everything out on a document, and they answered both of those questions at the same time. This is the options we'd have, and if we're the SNP government, this is the one we'll choose. Now, nobody on the panel is involved with the SNP, so it's not as if we're pushing that message at all. And Alan have other things to say. Jim Sellers has brought out his book a few days ago, In Place of Fear 2, which is worth looking at. I've ordered a copy, I've not read it yet, which is his 80 or 100 page manifesto for what he thinks should be done, right? And Alan will talk about the radical independence, etc. They'll have their own manifesto. The Greens will be bringing out, I'm assuming, their manifesto. Labour's kind of interesting because they'll need to get their head around what they want to do. After that, they'll have 18 months to get their head around what they want to do for 2016 election. And there's actually a group on the right called Wealthy Nation, who are Tories and ex-Tories who've put together a pro-independence group, and they've got a website as well, and they're putting forward what they would do. So there's a whole range of stuff out there other than the SNP.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, to me, it's very interesting, and I actually, I think that a yes vote will cause all of the parties, including the SNP, to re-reflect on what their priorities are. And I think it goes back to a point that Alan made earlier, this kind of bing bang of particularly in Scotland, we've had a lot about the visceral dislike between the Labour Party and the SNP, when really in policy terms, until most recently when they've started voting against things like the bedroom tax, which is just absolutely ridiculous. For many years there wasn't that much difference in them in policy terms, but there was this thing around independence. And you have to remember as well that some people might say, oh, well, there's a lot of SNP involved in this. For many, many years, the SNP was the only political party that was in favour of independence, and other parties and other groups have kind of joined the fold. I mean, I think it's going to be very healthy. I think the SNP will cause and stop and think, well, what are they in terms of a political party? I think the Labour Party certainly will need to look at themselves really quite significantly. The Tories as well. Now, it's become very fashionable to say, Margaret Thatcher, we just like the Tories. But actually, arguably, we need a broad range of parties. To me, that's healthy. I certainly don't see it that, I mean, maybe it's likely that the SNP will form the first government because they currently are the strongest party in Scotland. But things will evolve, and actually it's necessary and it's healthy. Things will change, and I think things will change. Alan?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I mean, I think personally that an independent Scotland should go left, as left as the electorate will allow it to go. Because the other direction just hasn't worked. I think the SNP will probably be elected as the first ruling party of an independent Scotland thereafter. I think it's anybody's game. I do think there'll be a lot of soul searching from other parties. I think a lot of those parties will have to take a long, hard look at themselves in the mirror if they can see a reflection there.
Very good.
But I do think there'll be a rising of the Greens and the SSP. I think the Radical Independence campaign could coalesce into a party some point down the line. I think you might see people detaching from the SNP, Labour, Lib Dems, and going towards that left bloc, whatever form it takes. Because make no mistake, if the SNP betray what all of us are fighting for, they'll have to be punished for it. You know, it's not SNP or bust. I mean, I support them as a mechanism to achieve independence, but, you know, I'm not putting my neck on the line just so they can, you know, take over and do what the hell they like. You know, we'll all be watching them very, very carefully, and they'll know it. But I think the pressure on them in Parliament will come from the left.
My question was kind of aimed around that, because a lot of people that I speak to still think independence equals SNP, you know, and I'm not saying tonight I think if I hadn't known better, I would have thought that too.
Sure.
In the discussion tonight,
Sure.
you know, and I've been to other debates where that's not been the case, and I know it's a different kind of debate because it's facts and figures and stuff, but I just wanted to sort of get your opinion on that, because I think that's why a lot of people won't vote.
The best way to get rid of Alex Salmon is to vote yes, because if you vote yes, he'll retire. Right? If you vote no, he'll be there forever.
We are really running out of time here. Tonight was brought to you by a company that's been thrown together by a couple of local people just trying to get the message out there. We're getting the message out there by streaming it live. We're getting the message out there by the thousands and thousands of people who have watched the YouTube videos that we did from the last event. This will be the same. We will be back in this venue and hopefully taking it on tour as well. Scottish Independence Live. If you want to Google it, you'll find all the connections there. If you want to go straight to YouTube, it's youtube.com/Independence Live. It's really straightforward. You can catch up with all the stuff that happened last time and double check all the stuff that's been happening tonight. I'd like to ask the panel to give us a closing statement on the economic facts and a vision for Scotland.
Well, I mean, no. I chucked everything into it earlier. I think it's the right thing to do. We'll regret it if we don't. Before I go, I would like to let people know that I'm running for rector of Glasgow University. So if you have any children there or anybody there, please tell them to vote for me. Edward Snowden is also running, but you know who's heard of him? What kind of media coverage is he going to get? But thank you very much for turning up in such huge numbers. I'm really pleased about that. But go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say, thanks very much, everybody, coming along. And I mean, it's amazing. When Kevin said we're going to put another event on, and I think we'll fill the place again, and it's all different people. It's just incredible. And really a big thanks to the guys that have worked behind the scenes, because there's about 10 of them that are all beavering away. It's very impressive and appreciated.
And just a thanks from me for everyone turning up. I've been really, really impressed with the quality of the debate and the questions, both last time and this time. And what I perceive is that the kind of debate on the ground is much more advanced than if you just believed what you read in the newspapers or the mainstream media. It's absolutely fantastic. I think it's an exciting, vibrant time to be alive. And I personally feel very privileged to be able to take my part and help shape the debate. And I think all of you should as well. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much. Well done, you. Well, good luck in Glasgow Uni.
See how that goes.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was really good last time.